A desert wind howled over the ridge, sweeping dust across the bare Nevada valley like smoke over forgotten graves. The late afternoon sun bled orange and red through thick clouds gathering on the horizon, signaling a storm. Birds had fallen silent. Even the wild horses had vanished from the open basin, except one. The mare was alone, stumbling through the rocky terrain, her hooves dragging through loose gravel. Her sides heaved. Her coat, usually the color of polished chestnut, was soaked in sweat and streaked with dust. She was heavily pregnant, farther along than she should have been, still moving. Her breaths came ragged and sharp, nostrils flaring with every effort. Each step was a battle, and she was losing. Far behind her, the herd had gone. The lead stallion hadn't looked back. She'd known that would happen. A mare that fell behind, that showed weakness, was a risk. The herd survived by leaving the slow behind. Now the contractions had started. She buckled to her knees once, then rose, only to collapse again behind a cluster of rock. She gave a low, pained cry, half whinny, half moan. Her legs tucked under her, her head bowed low, and the wind moved around her like a whisper. Several hundred yards away, Eli Morrow stood on the porch of a sun-bleached trailer perched at the edge of a dry gulch. A pair of battered binoculars hung from his neck. His face, leathery and etched by time, barely flinched at the sight of the struggling mare in the distance. He should have turned away. Instead, he tightened his grip on the railing, watching. A storm was brewing behind her, and she wouldn't survive long. But he remained still, rooted to that spot like he had been for years, buried beneath guilt and self-imposed exile. Eli hadn't touched a horse in nearly a decade. Inside the trailer, dust coated every shelf, every memory. Framed photos hung slightly askew, one of a smiling young woman in riding gear, her arm draped around a proud bay stallion. Her eyes were her father's, only lighter. Her name was Grace. He hadn't spoken it aloud in years. Outside, thunder cracked in the distance. Eli muttered a curse, tore the binoculars from his neck, and grabbed his coat. "Damn it," he growled to no one. As he approached, he moved with the steady confidence of someone who had once lived his entire life around horses. The mare didn't react as he neared. Her eyes were half-lidded, her body trembling violently. She was too far gone. But the foal might still have a chance. Kneeling in the dust, Eli pressed his hand gently against her flank. The rhythm of labor was strong. The foal was coming fast. His fingers moved instinctively, checking positioning, heartbeat, readiness. It was as if the years had never passed. His mind recalled every step, every motion. His hands, though weathered, remembered. Lightning lit the sky behind them. A rumble followed. The mare gave one final, gasping cry, and the foal spilled into the world, a mess of limbs, wet fur, and silence. Eli's heart caught. No sound. He cleared the foal's nose, rubbed its ribs, checked the chest. Still no breath. "Come on," he murmured. "Not like this." He tilted the foal's head back, breathed gently into its nostrils, and rubbed harder at the chest. Another breath. Then again. For a moment, the world shrank to just Eli, the storm, and a tiny, motionless form between his hands. Then the foal jerked. A small, sudden gasp of air. And then another. Eli exhaled sharply, his hands trembling. The foal was alive. The mare, however, was not. He looked down at her still form. Her eyes were open, glassy, unfocused. A part of her had waited just long enough. Eli's throat tightened. He turned his attention back to the foal, now curled beside its mother, slick and shivering. That was when he saw it clearly. The coat was a pale gold, like morning sunlight on wheat. Its mane, thin and damp, was almost silver. But it was the eyes that caught him. Unblinking. Unnatural. Icy blue. They locked onto his. "You're something else," Eli whispered. He looked toward the horizon. The storm was nearly on them. The wind was already picking up grit and hurling it into his face. He glanced at the lifeless mare, then at the foal. It wouldn't last long out here. A coyote would pick it off by morning. Maybe sooner. He told himself to walk away. Instead, he pulled off his coat, wrapped the foal carefully, and lifted it into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, bones barely held together by skin and promise. The rain started halfway back to the trailer. By the time he reached the porch, he was soaked. He pushed open the screen door with his foot, stepped inside, and laid the foal on a pile of old horse blankets near the fireplace. The foal whimpered once, then went still. Eli built a fire. He warmed milk. He scoured the barn for an old bottle. Everything he hadn't touched in a decade, he now touched. Every corner of his self-imposed silence was disturbed by that tiny presence on his floor. By morning, the foal stood on trembling legs. It turned and walked to him, not cautiously, not nervously, as if it had already decided Eli was part of its world. The old man stared down at it. Well, hell. The foal gave a soft snort. Then, startling Eli, it let out a perfect imitation of the whistle Eli had used when calming horses. He froze. That wasn't possible. Echoes, he thought. Maybe it was just an echo. But the foal stared straight at him, head tilted, as if waiting for a response. It whistled again, flawless. The exact pitch. The exact tone. Eli blinked. A chill traced down his spine that had nothing to do with the storm outside. I must be going mad, he muttered. But the foal nuzzled his hand. And for the first time in years, Eli Morrow, hermit, recluse, and ghost of a man, felt something warm stir in his chest. Hope. He looked out the window toward the hills, where the wind still whispered secrets through the trees. He didn't know what this strange, pale cold was, but something told him the world was about to find out. The sun rose slow and cold the next morning, casting long shadows across the frost-hardened ground. Eli stood at the edge of the paddock, arms folded against his chest, watching the foal wobble on unsteady legs. It had taken nearly an hour just to get the little thing to latch onto the bottle, and even now, its gulps were unsure. But it was alive and curious. The foal moved with strange precision, as though every step was a calculation. His ears twitched to every sound, the rustle of the trees, the creak of Eli's boots, the distant call of a hawk, and each time, he turned toward it alert. There was no panic, no flinching, just calm, intelligent awareness. Eli had seen thousands of foals in his life. None like this. He leaned on the fence, gazing at the colt's pale coat, shimmering under the thin light. "You're not just rare," he murmured. "You're wrong in a way that feels right." He didn't name him at first. Naming felt like claiming, and Eli wasn't ready to be responsible for anything again. He had buried too much. But over the next few days, something inside him began to thaw. The silence he'd lived in cracking at the edges. The foal followed him constantly, mimicking his every move, lifting a leg when Eli lifted his, copying his whistle, even tilting his head when Eli did. That mimicry grew uncanny. If Eli cleared his throat, the foal made a near-perfect coughing sound. When the radio crackled static, the foal repeated the sound back like a recording. It wasn't just mimicry, it was learning. After 3 days, Eli finally said aloud, "Echo. That's what I'll call you." The foal blinked and let out a soft, breathy call, almost a question, as though tasting the name. He was getting stronger fast. Too fast. Within a week, he was sprinting awkward laps around the pen, his legs still gangly but gaining coordination. Eli didn't want to admit it, but Echo gave him a reason to wake up, a rhythm to his days again. Feeding, brushing, watching, noticing. Still, he kept his distance emotionally, or tried to. He told himself it was temporary, that once Echo was weaned, he'd release him into the hills or contact a sanctuary. Something safe, something responsible. But then Nora Fielding showed up. She arrived in a dusty silver truck bearing the logo of a wildlife conservation group, her long dark braid swinging behind her as she stepped onto Eli's property like she belonged there. Late 20s, sharp eyes, clipboard in hand. She didn't knock. She just stood at the edge of the paddock, staring at the foal. Eli noticed her the moment she stepped onto his land. He walked out from the barn, jaw tight. "Can I help you?" She turned, surprised by the sharp tone. "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. Are you Eli Morrow?" He gave a reluctant nod. "I'm Dr. Nora Fielding. I'm a field biologist working with the Nevada Mustang Genetic Research Program. I heard rumors about a pale foal found alone in the wild. Then I got a tip from a local supply store. You'd come in asking for goat milk and horse formula." Eli frowned. "So you're spying on me now?" I'm tracking genetic anomalies in wild mustangs. If that colt is what I think he is, he might not just be rare. He might be unprecedented. Eli said nothing, just studied her like he would a skittish horse, careful not to show too much movement. Nora glanced back at Echo, who was watching them both with intense focus. Have you noticed anything unusual about his behavior? Besides the fact that he mimics birds and makes radio noises? Eli muttered. Her eyes widened. Wait, what? That's incredible. Eli regretted the words the second they left his mouth. He hated attention, especially the kind that might bring strangers poking around. Nora took a careful step closer to the fence. I've studied hundreds of mustangs. I've never seen anything like him. Do you know how rare blue eyes are in wild horses? And that coat, it's almost pearlescent. He's just a colt, Eli said. Different doesn't mean better. But it might mean endangered, she said quietly. He turned to go. Appreciate your concern, document. But I'm not putting him in a lab. I'm not asking you to, she replied, softer now. I just want to observe him. That's all. No samples, no tags. I promise. Eli paused. A long silence settled between them. I'll be back tomorrow, she said. If that's all right. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. That night, as the wind settled and the crickets took over the evening, Eli stood in the barn, watching Echo sleep. The foal twitched in his sleep, ears flicking, legs kicking at dreams. Eli ran a hand along his neck. You brought the world to my door, he said quietly. Guess I should have known you wouldn't stay a secret. The next morning, Nora returned with a camera, a notebook, and a gentler approach. She sat on the fence instead of entering, watching Echo from a distance. She took notes without speaking, letting the silence do the talking. Eli, against his better judgment, brought her coffee. They talked little that day, but when she left, she smiled in a way that wasn't scientific, it was human. Over the following week, the routine shifted. Nora visited daily. Echo grew bolder, faster, sharper. He began to respond to her presence, too, mimicking the jingling of her keys, the clicking of her pen. It unnerved her, but fascinated her more. You know, she said one morning as they watched Echo test his balance on a fallen tree. Some native tribes believed spirit horses were born in storms. Messengers. Guides. Eli scoffed, but it wasn't cruel. That colt's just stubborn and too clever for his own good. That's what makes him special, she said. He's not just a horse. He's something waiting to happen. Eli didn't answer, but her words echoed in his head long after she'd gone. That night, Echo stood at the barn door, ears tilted toward the hills. A distant sound carried on the wind, faint but clear. A stallion's neigh, sharp and wild. Eli stood behind Echo, feeling the hairs rise on his arms. That came from the ridge, he whispered. But there's no herd up there this time of year. Echo neighed in response, not randomly, not playfully, but in a perfect imitation of the call they'd just heard. Eli felt the breath leave his lungs. It wasn't just mimicry anymore. It was a conversation. The valley felt different in the days that followed. The wind seemed sharper, the shadows longer. Echo had grown in ways that didn't make sense. His legs more sure, his movements more precise. He'd gone from awkward foal to confident yearling in what felt like a matter of weeks. His coat shimmered now with a light that looked silver under certain skies. But it wasn't just his body changing. His mind was evolving and fast. Eli didn't say it out loud, but he could feel it. The bond between him and Echo had shifted into something deeper, something unspoken. Echo responded not only to voice, but to emotion. If Eli was restless, Echo paced. If Eli sat silently with his grief, Echo lay beside him. When Nora visited now, Echo stood between her and Eli at first, as if measuring her worth before letting her close. Nora noticed the changes too. She kept a tighter journal, filled with observations, diagrams, even sketches. He's listening, she said one morning. Not just hearing, listening. Processing. This isn't typical behavior, Eli. This is language, or something very close to it. Eli rubbed his jaw, not answering. He watched Echo roll in the dirt, rise in one fluid motion, and canter to the fence like a ballet dancer with hooves. She closed the notebook slowly. I need to tell my team. No, Eli said firmly. You tell them, and they'll be out here with cameras and drones and sedatives. I wouldn't let that happen. You might not have a choice, he replied. People like that, they don't ask. They take. Nora looked at him carefully. So what do you want to do? Eli didn't answer. He didn't know. Echo was a miracle, and miracles never stayed hidden for long. That night, a truck came up the road without headlights. Eli was already on the porch, shotgun across his knees. He saw the silhouette of two men step out, voices low, steps deliberate. One of them carried a loop of rope, the other a cattle prod. Echo stood alert inside the paddock, ears forward, legs braced. He made no sound. He didn't need to. Eli stepped off the porch. You boys lost. The taller one chuckled. Not at all. We heard you've got something real valuable back here. I don't sell horses. We're not asking you to, the other man said, stepping forward. We're offering you a retirement plan. Eli raised the barrel slightly. You've got 5 seconds. The taller man's grin faded. You really want to die over a freak horse? Eli's finger twitched. 5. They hesitated, cursed under their breath, then backed away. Tires spun up dust as they sped off into the night. Echo didn't flinch once. The next morning, Nora found broken footprints near the fence. She traced them silently, her jaw tight. They'll come back, she said. And next time, they'll bring more than a rope. Eli nodded. He knew. The thought of Echo being taken, caged, experimented on. It made something hot and primal rise in his chest. That evening, he took Echo into the open field behind the barn. There was no halter, no saddle, just space and trust. He stood a few yards away, looked into those strange blue eyes, and whispered, "Run." Echo burst forward like lightning. His hooves barely touched the ground. His muscles rippled under his shimmering coat, moving like water, like sound. He wasn't just fast, he was poetry in motion, every stride a declaration of freedom. Eli felt his throat close. He hadn't seen movement like that since Grace, his daughter, had ridden her last horse across this very field. He walked back to the barn slower than usual. Inside, dust clung to every surface. The photograph of Grace had tilted again. He straightened it. The girl who had once dreamed of taming wild mustangs now looked back at him with quiet pride. He found her old tack trunk in the loft, buried under a sheet and years of avoidance. Inside were her notes, sketches, training schedules, and a small leather journal. The first page read, "Asterisk to tame a wild thing. You must first let it believe it is free." Asterisk. He carried it down and set it beside Echo's feed pail. 2 days later, a wildfire broke out in the next valley over. A dry lightning strike had sparked it, and the wind carried the flames fast. Nora's research center, a few miles to the east, stood directly in its path. She arrived at Eli's trailer, eyes wide with panic. "We have 15 horses and pens up there. I tried getting help, but the fire's moving faster than the fire trucks." Eli didn't hesitate. "Let's go." The drive was chaos. Smoke rolled over the hills like waves. Ash rained down on the windshield. By the time they reached the facility, the air stung their throats. Horses screamed in fear, crashing against their gates. Nora moved fast, trying to unlatch the pens, but the animals were panicked, surging too hard. Eli knew it wouldn't work. They needed calm. They needed a leader. Then Echo stepped forward. He had jumped into the back of the trailer before they'd left. Neither Eli nor Nora had noticed until it was too late. Now he walked slowly through the chaos, completely unafraid. He stood in the middle of the courtyard and lifted his head high. Then, clear and strong, he whistled. It was Eli's whistle, exact, perfect, familiar. The panicked horses stopped. Echo neighed again, low and commanding. Slowly, the nearest penned horse turned toward him. Then another. Then the rest. Nora opened the main gate, and Echo led them out. He trotted ahead, letting out the same calm, confident sound, pausing only to wait for those too scared to move. Eli and Nora followed in stunned silence, guiding from the rear. By the time the fire reached the perimeter fence, every horse had crossed the river and made it to safety. Echo stood on the far bank, watching the flames crawl up the sky. The next day, the story made national news. A drone had captured the moment, a pale Mustang guiding a herd to safety through fire and ash. Reporters called him the ghost horse of the blaze. Others called it a myth, a trick of light and luck. But Eli knew better. So did Nora. And somewhere deep in the hills, so did every wild horse that heard echoes call echo through the canyon. The world was watching now, and Echo had just begun to speak. Days passed, then weeks, and yet the image of Echo standing tall before the fire, his pale coat glowing against the smoke, remained burned into the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Across the country, news anchors repeated his name. Articles labeled him a phenomenon. Scientists speculated about genetics and evolution, while online videos racked up millions of views. But fame had teeth. Eli knew it as soon as the first unmarked helicopters buzzed the hills. When reporters began showing up at the edge of his property. When men in suits knocked on his trailer door with government badges and polite threats. The world wasn't content to watch Echo from a distance. They wanted to own him. No, Eli said flatly, his voice steady as steel. You're not taking him. This horse could be the key to understanding an entirely new line of wild genetics, one official argued. You owe it to science, to history. Eli stepped forward, his eyes blazing. I don't owe you anything. That colt isn't your key, your lab rat, or your ticket to a grant. He's a soul. You want to understand him? Watch from the fence. They didn't like that answer, but Eli didn't flinch. Nora stood beside him, silent until the officials left. They'll try again, she said softly. I know. You can't keep him hidden forever. I'm not trying to hide him. I'm trying to protect what made him special in the first place, his freedom. Nora nodded. Then let's make sure that freedom has a place. It took weeks of negotiation, land rights, signatures, and patience Eli barely possessed. But by the end of the month, a sanctuary was founded in the very valley Echo had once nearly died in. A protected stretch of rolling hills, shallow streams, and ancient grazing routes, untouched and wild. A place where Echo could remain himself, yet be safe from those who saw him as a prize. The ceremony was small. No cameras. Just Eli, Nora, a handful of conservationists, and a plaque carved in stone. Asterisk Echo Ridge Sanctuary. For the wild, the free, and the rare. Asterisk. Echo stood at the crest of the hill that morning, wind tousling his mane, as though he understood every word spoken in his honor. Later, Eli opened the gate himself. Echo didn't bolt. He didn't run. He walked slowly out into the wild, pausing every few yards to look back. His eyes met Eli's one final time before he vanished into the open land. That night, the ranch felt quieter than it had in months. Not empty, just quieter. Eli sat on the porch with Grace's old journal in his lap. The stars stretched endlessly above him, and in the distance, he heard a faint whistle echo through the hills. Not a copy, not an imitation, a voice. Weeks turned to seasons. Nora returned often, not as a visitor anymore, but as part of something that felt like home. She helped rebuild the barn, expand the fencing, even bring in other rescued Mustangs. She and Eli trained troubled colts together, using gentleness over force, patience over power. And through it all, Echo's presence remained, sometimes seen, often heard, always felt. One winter morning, Eli awoke to find a single silver feather hanging from the barn door. No bird in the area matched it. He smiled, tucked it in his coat pocket, and didn't ask questions. Then, one spring, the herd returned. No one expected it. Not Eli, not Nora, not the biologists tracking their migrations. A massive Mustang band, nearly 40 strong, descended into Echo Ridge, as if drawn by something they could not name. At the front was a stallion, taller than most, with a mane like braided silk and eyes the color of frozen lakes. Echo had come home, and he hadn't come alone. The herd settled in naturally, grazing the hillsides, drinking from the streams. Echo's leadership was subtle but unquestioned. He didn't fight for dominance. He inspired it. Young colts copied his movements. Mares followed his cues, without needing pressure or fear. He led with presence, not force. Eli and Nora observed from a respectful distance, The biologists, now granted limited access, were allowed to document, but only without interference. The world had changed since Echo's birth, and perhaps Echo had helped change it. One evening, Nora sat beside Eli on the porch, watching the herd move like shadows across the setting sun. "You ever think he was meant for more?" she asked quietly. Eli looked at her. "More than what?" "More than just being rare. More than just a symbol." He nodded slowly. "I think he was born because the world forgot what wild meant, and he reminded us." Nora smiled. "You reminded me too, you know." Eli chuckled. "I just fed him milk and kept him from freezing." "No, you believed in him. That's what mattered." Silence fell again, but it was the peaceful kind. The kind that felt like music waiting to be written. Years passed. Echo's legend grew, though the sanctuary remained closed to the public. Eli and Nora continued their work with wild horses, eventually opening their land to troubled youths, kids who had been broken by the world and needed something pure to trust. Echo taught them too. He would appear at the edge of the pasture during therapy rides, standing still, letting the kids come close. Some said he could read pain. Others said he just listened better than most people. Whatever it was, he helped. And then came the day Eli couldn't rise from bed. Old bones. Worn lungs. The kind of ache that told him he was nearing the last gate. He lay under a quilt on the porch, breathing in the spring air, listening to the birds. Nora sat beside him, holding his hand. Echo stood on the hill beyond the paddock, unmoving. "Think he knows?" Eli asked weakly. He always knew. Eli turned his eyes to the sky. "Tell him, I'm not afraid. Not anymore. I will." A soft breeze swept through the valley, and in it a whistle. Not Eli's. Echo's. A farewell. Eli smiled, closed his eyes, and let the peace wash over him. At dawn, Echo came to the porch and stood still, his head lowered. He didn't make a sound, just waited. Nora stepped out and touched his muzzle gently. "He's gone," she whispered. Echo stayed a moment longer, then turned and galloped into the open hills, the wind chasing his heels. In the years that followed, people still spoke of him, of the pale cold born in a storm, of the fire he braved, the lives he saved, and the man he healed. Statues were made, books were written, but none captured the truth quite like the wind over Echo Ridge, or the sound of a single, perfect whistle cutting through the trees. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day. Stories that remind us of the bond between man and horse, and the power of second chances.